To the left, we have the LG C1. To the right, we have the Hisense U7G. The U7G is a 65-inch. The C1 is a 55-inch, and I'm going to be talking about the differences here between these two displays. Now, first and foremost, I just want you guys to know that, yes, the LG is the better gaming TV out of the gate. There is not really much I have to say to kind of convince many of you of that. You kind of already know that. We're not here to argue that point. We're just going to be talking about maybe for your preferences, what are some differences and how one relates to the other. So I'll start off by talking about LG's game bar because it's pretty robust this year and you've got a lot of features in there that kind of make it super duper worth it. So I'll zoom in so you can see just the C1. Okay, I'm doing this all handheld, so please forgive me. I do have a space limitation, so if you see a little shaky camera, that's just kind of how it has to be. So when you hit your settings button while in game mode, it'll pull up the brand new game bar menu. Now, what I really like about this is you have a couple different options. You can choose the center, which is your preset. All you got to do is just go down or up, and it will go through and cycle various presets, and you'll see it moving on the side here, right over here, and you'll see it moving as you choose what you want. Now, I like the RPG setting when I'm playing, obviously, RPG games, but let's say you didn't like the preset. You can go into Game Optimizer, and then you can start customizing and tuning things to your liking. Now, I like the black stabilizer on 5. I think that really gives me an inky, deep black level, but again, you can play around with it and see what looks best for you. Also, what's really cool about the black stabilizer is that essentially it gives you what I would call an unfair advantage in video games. Let's find like a dark area here, like something like this, more or less would be pretty dark. If you're in a game where you notice that there's parts that are really, really dark, that is going to be a non-issue for you because all you have to do is just brighten up the black stabilizer as much as you want. And essentially you can super wash out the image, revealing every little detail there is. This is going to give a lot of competitive gamers the edge online and allow you to really just kind of camp and snipe your enemies or whatever you're trying to do. Hisense goes middle ground. They have shadow detail opened up pretty wide by default, so you will still see a great amount of shadow detail regardless of what you do, which again, that might be a pro for some people, might be a con for some people, but for the most part, your shadow detail is almost always going to be really wide open on the Hisense, as you guys can kind of see here. And then when you look at this, they're virtually identical with the way they go about it, but obviously LG does let you dial it in a little bit more on a refined level, quite obviously, because they have the options to do so. Okay then, so now we go into our white stabilizer and kind of talk about that. The white stabilizer is really cool because when you look up at like a bright highlight, for example, like this one up here, if I go to my white stabilizer and I start plussing that up, that's going to dim my bright highlights on the C1. And that basically will, I guess, maybe for some games tighten up over brightness and prevent clipping issues in some areas, I suppose. I don't know. It really would have to, I guess, depend on the game. It going up dims your highlight, but if you want the brightest and the most uniform highlight, you can then go to +1 or even 0, and that really just brightens up your highlight. Again, you have to choose how much you want to see, but you guys can kind of get the general idea here. Now, I like really bright, punchy highlights because OLED has ABL anyway, so I really don't feel like I need to dim my highlights when OLED's going to do that anyway, so I brighten it up with like +1. But you guys can see, like in game mode, you have quite a lot of options that you can pick from, and then of course, you have even the ability to turn on your motion processing option through your game optimizer. And I'll show you guys this as well. You go all the way down to the bottom, and you can see I have OLED Motion Pro on low. This helps increase contrast, motion fluidity, and things like that, but at the expense of some brightness. Now, if you didn't want to use that, you can turn it off, of course. By turning it off, you'll get some brightness back, but as you guys see, it's nothing game-changing in the brightness department that you get back. So I think low is just truly acceptable for game mode to make sure things stay smooth. And again, I'm going to go back into that game optimizer, and we're just going to change the black level from 20 back down so you guys can kind of see like how I would normally use it, right? So by default, it goes to 7 in the RPG preset, so that's somewhere around here. That's where they leave it. And I guess for all intents and purposes, I suppose I'll just leave it there so we can have an apples to apples and not just what I would prefer. Now, looking at the Hisense though, Hisense is, again, they're wide open kind of all the time. You don't have any extra features like a game bar or anything like that. So you got to use the tools of the television to kind of dial in and get things exactly where you want it. Not to say that that's a bad approach or that anything would be detrimentally broken. As you see, you're still getting a great image quality, but there are things that will go amiss, and I just kind of wanted to show that off because if you're somebody who's playing one of these story-driven games, there's going to be a big difference, as you can see, as far as quality when you can dial in things versus not having that option to dial in things. So we're going to go and let this story play out here. I'm going to try to sit a little further back in my room so you can kind of see motion and everything on both displays. The Hisense is looking a lot more gray by comparison, but you do have a lot more shadow detail, which makes things like the that little thing that she's looking at in the middle kind of stick out more. Her boots, all that stuff kind of stand out a little bit more. Now, on my camera, everything is just turning really red. It's trying to meter the exposure and saturation for both TVs, and it is failing to do so miserably. That's just one of the things with auto white balance you have to kind of think about with cameras. But there was no real other way to do this, so bear with the overly red nature of the C10 or the C1 because it's just not going to look the way it's supposed to. But what you can try to take away is maybe some motion advantages on one versus the other. I'll zoom out even further so you guys can see both in frame. And there you guys have it. You can see, like, as it's moving around, the C1 looks excellent, but I find that with game mode, the Hisense U7G is also keeping up pretty well. And what they do with the U7G is really incredible because they add a little bit of motion blur, but that motion blur helps things to look really, really smooth. Now, sometimes it can look a little jittery and a little choppy like now, but for the most part, sometimes their method of presenting motion can exceed what you'd find on the C1, at least from my playing and testing and seeing which one does what. Now, when you look at the left, again, as you're going to see, it's going to be overly red. Don't take that as what it's actually going to look like because that's not what it actually looks like. But either way you look at it, you can see that there's just a lot going on here. A lot of jitters. I mean, in some cases, like with the rocks falling down, you are seeing a bit of that on the C1. It was a little blurry and now it's clear again. So again, they're going to trade back and forth. Now, the responsive nature of both TVs are there. Both TVs can give you good brightness. But I think, honestly, what's really going to do it for a lot of people is maybe the shadow detail, I would have to say, and the color representation on the C1 is just more fine-tunable than what you have on the U7G. But again, the U7G is keeping up so well. Like, as I switch back and forth and I look between the two TVs, I don't find myself noticing a disparaging difference in motion clarity. So the motion processing in game mode on the U7G is excellent because right now, with one of the best TVs and actually the best TV that you could probably go up against, the C1, I mean, it's doing an excellent job with giving me what I want. Now, obviously now, as I look at clarity, it's a total domination on the by the C1 to the U7G, but again, you can't really expect too much out of pixel level illumination versus, something that's a full array that's not even targeting the most highest end level of full array quality. So something you have to think about. But the game optimizer on the C1 really coming in clutch here because, man, when I tell you it's beautiful looking at how dark and rich the shadows are while not being crushed out, letting you fine-tune that is incredible. And I really hope LG maybe considers bringing this feature to their regular picture menu because so many times do I just want to open up shadow detail to prevent black crush or maybe dim down highlights or brighten them up. And to be able to do that with a toggle is incredible. I really wish that this was something that was available in regular picture modes that allowed for motion processing to be enabled. But either way, as I look at both of these TVs, both are representing themselves very well, very faithfully, looking really good. Now, as I look at it with my naked eye, I am noticing that the LG C1 has more ambient light, but the U7G does look a little bit more natural by comparison. Again, this is going to be a terrible video for you guys to use to try to assess natural quality because on the camera it's just overly red on the C1. So again, that's not how it actually looks in real life. You're gonna have to take my word for it. But as I'm seeing it both side by side, I mean, I like the natural colors coming off of the U7G. It looks really good. So in game mode, it really does a good job for you. But again, it will need some work because there is a bit of a green hue to it as the fire is kind of on Lara Croft. So that's some of the things that are maybe not so great about this whole thing. But either way you look at it, both TVs are fully competent. And if you wanted a gaming TV and maybe you didn't want all the bells and whistles, and you wanted to know how far behind something like the Hisense U7G was, it's really not that far behind at all as far as performance, because as my eyes shift going left to right constantly during this video, I'm not noticing any major issues or hiccups on the U7G that makes me look at the C1 and go, wow, the C1 is just so much better. The only thing that really did it was honestly the game optimizer, because from a fluidity and performance standpoint, they are basically pretty equivalent for the most part. So hopefully this helped you guys out. If you like videos like this, smack a like on it. And thanks so much for watching the #1 brand in honesty. Until the next video, I'll see you guys later.